The garden definitely enters a new season in July, and it's conventional wisdom that late July and August can be quite tricky in a garden, but that's not true here at Longmeadow at all. It's the summer holidays and you get this flush of wonderful rich colour. The tawny shades, oranges, browns, and then deep purples and plum colours, which can last right into autumn. They say August is a tricky time in the garden. Well, not here it is. In tonight's programme, I'll be showing you how to extend the colour of your sweet peas for as long as possible into late summer. It's also time to summer prune apples and pears, so I'll be sharing my tips on how to do that. Plus, if you've got primulas, now is the perfect time to propagate them. Gardening on a steep slope can be tricky, but Carol meets a man who relishes the challenge of a hillside.
You turn around and you say, no, how can I possibly garden?
And slugs may be devouring your hostas, but you can do something about it, as Rachel finds out when she drops in on a couple of hostaholics.
There's more here. I do feel like I've stepped into another world.
I sowed our sweet peas in March and planted them out in May. And whilst they were a bit slow to start because we had a very dry early spring and rather a cold middle and late spring, they've done well. And I want them to go on doing well for as long as possible. And the way to do that is to keep picking them. That's the key, because sweet peas, once the weather gets warmer and the days get shorter, really want to start producing seed. There's an urgent need to get seed before next year, and we want to delay that process. And what we found through trial and error is that if you pick every 10 days and pick the whole lot, that maximises the flowers and minimises the seeds. And when you're cutting back, do make sure that you go right back for as long a stem as possible. Don't leave any stubs. But I'll leave these buds here and here, and they will flower on into the border. So there is a continuity. It's not as though you just get a shock of flowers every 10 days. Now, I know that it might seem a bit unlikely, but one of my own real personal pleasures of gardening is picking flowers. I really like cutting flowers for the house. I can't stress too much how, if it's hot and dry and you don't pick them, how quickly they'll set seed. You do need to keep on top of this picking regime of every 9 or 10 days. And also, give them a good soak. Every time you pick them, give them a bucket of water or a watering can, and with any luck, they should go on giving you lovely flowers in the borders right into September, as well as lots of cut flowers for the house. Now, this part of the damp garden has no visible flowers at all at the moment, but there are a couple of things here that I am watching like a hawk and treasuring. The first are these Meconopsis sheldonii, and I really, really want to make them work because they've got the most amazing blue flower in spring, and I have tried in the past and failed. And the secret is to keep them damp all summer. Not sopping, but just don't let them dry out. Now, luckily we've had plenty of rain in the last few months, but they do need watering once a week with a shower, with a sprinkle, so the whole thing is moist. And they're looking healthy. They should be good. This is Primula bulliana, and now is a perfect time to propagate it, both by seed from the green seed and also by division, by splitting it. And you can see that where the flowers have formed these tiers, wonderful orange, intense flowers that last for ages, they've left groups of seed heads. I'll just cut off those stems. Those will go to the potting shed, but before that, I'm going to divide the plant. Dig the whole thing up. Came up very easily. There we go. There we go. And you can see that's divided through. Now I could divide that again. Pull that apart. There we are. Two nice plants from that. However, they're all been cut off because they've done their job. That now we can replant. By taking the leaves off, we're taking stress off the roots, which have been traumatized, hacked about, dug up. Put it in the ground, give it a really good soak, and keep it moist. New leaves will grow, and there'll be a new vigor to the plant, and that will flower enthusiastically next spring. Now, these go really well with hostas, and of course share exactly the same growing conditions of damp soil, but taking sun or shade. And I've got lots of hostas here, and would like to get more, but I've never called myself a hostaholic. However, Rachel has been to visit a couple in Hampshire to whom the word hostaholic really doesn't do sufficient justice.
Wow, this is unlike any garden I've ever been to before. It's so lush. There is so much foliage, hostas everywhere. It's absolutely extraordinary. More here. There's only just room to walk through. I do feel like I've stepped into another world.
This incredible collection, christened the Hanging Hostas of Hampshire, is the creation of June Coley and her partner John. When did you first get hooked on hostas?
I started growing hosta in 1995. I was looking for a perennial for the shade. I saw this hosta at a car boat sale, and it grew very well in my backyard. And then I started to look for other hostas in the local nursery. So now I have about 1,300 varieties.
We've gone up the walls of the house and vertically into the trees and made pagodas with the hostas. It's often said that the hosta people are hostaholics. We can always find ways to find a room for a few more.
The garden is divided into different spaces. There's an artificial but very convincing stream running through lush, naturalistic planting. Contrasting with this is the cool formality of the Islamic garden. There are variegated hostas, blues, yellows and miniatures, and all expertly arranged.
So do you both tend to agree about what goes where, how you arrange things?
No, I'm the one who decides where this should go.
Right, there's got to be a boss in the garden.
Yeah.
Well, that's certainly June.
I always look for the colors, the size, and shape. And
June is very creative, and she can set out the hostas and arrange them. That's why we have them in pots, because she can move them about and get a pleasing display.
This is amazing, June. It's like wherever you look, there are hostas. I mean, just growing them up here in the pots on the wall, that's fantastic.
well, it is a custom in the tropics to hang plants, and also at this level you can appreciate the foliage even more.
So what would you describe as the ideal growing conditions for hostas? What do they really need to thrive?
Dapple shade. They like to have maybe 4 hours of sun. We use potting compost, we use humus, we use grit to give the roots the best chance for growing. And we feed the plant. We use slow release fertilizer, and we give them a boost ready for growing roots in the autumn and producing the shoots for the next year.
Now, you cannot sit here and not admire the fact that it is pristine. I mean, the leaves are all beautiful. I can't see any holes, any damage anywhere. So this is the million-dollar question. What do you do about slugs and snails?
The most important thing is garden cleanliness. So in the autumn we clear up all the debris, and that gets rid of a lot of slugs and snail eggs which are likely to hatch in the spring. And then usually around February time we use the blue slug pellet and we distribute that like seeds around the garden, and that kills off the first generation of slugs and snails that may be emerging. And then when the leaves have emerged, and the slugs and snails might be on leaves, we use a garlic spray. It irritates their nervous system and they go off into someone else's garden. It doesn't kill them, but it does kill slug eggs in the soil.
John's recipe for garlic spray is as follows. Crush 1 bulb of garlic and add it to a litre of water. Boil it for 5 minutes, and when it's cooled, sieve it, bottle it, and put it in the fridge. Then add 1 tablespoonful per litre of water and spray.
This garden is very deceptive, but in the best way. It's not a big garden, but it looks enormous. And I think that's because they've divided up the space, so you don't see everything immediately. You have to work your way through the paths, and sometimes it's really quite narrow. And then each space has a very individual feel. It's absolutely beautiful. And the best thing of all is if this was the entirety of your garden, this small space here, just look how beautiful it can be.
I've been increasing my stock of candelabra primulas. I've lifted, divided and replanted a batch, but I'm also going to propagate more from green seed. Right, just water in the last of these primula divisions. There we go. And now I'll go and sow the seed. Whoops, dropped my glasses. Always doing that. Okay, these seeds being green will germinate much quicker than if they're left to dry. And it's a fairly straightforward process. Just take a small container. I actually have a homemade mix which I use leaf mould, a little bit of garden compost, some vermiculite. But you can use any peat-free compost, but just thin it down. It doesn't need a lot of nutrition because these will be pricked out as soon as they're big enough to handle. Right, here we go. Now, we're so used to thinking of seed as this dry thing that we harvest and we store and we dry out. It's quite novel to go for green seed. There we are. Now we take that out and it looks like a little green raspberry. And the paler parts, each one is a separate seed. So if I gently break that apart and just drop them on the surface of the compost, that's all I need to do. It is amazing to think that each one of these is going to make a new plant. Now, don't cover it because primula seeds are stimulated into germination by light. If you're going to put these somewhere where it's remotely windy or you think it's going to be disturbed, you could put a thin covering of vermiculite, but best not. Best just to leave it open. And because the seeds are a bit sticky, they're not dry at all or light like dried seeds, they should just stay put. The next step is just to sit that in some water so the soil can get moist, and then put it somewhere where the air is moist. Now, an easy way of doing that is to put a sheet of glass over it. So water it, and then put glass over the top. Light can get in, but the moisture can't evaporate out. Or, I've got a mist propagator, that's perfect. Put it under there, and then just the air is kept moist all the time. Failing that, you can put a polythene bag, but it must be clear. We need light on those seeds, and they should germinate in 3 to 4 weeks, and then we can prick them out. Although the herbs are now in their heyday, it is worth thinking about next year already. Because if we have a winter like the last couple, we're bound to lose herbs in the process, particularly the Mediterranean ones like rosemary and sage and lavender. And I've got some lavender here. This is Lavandula stoicus, which is really not very hardy at all. And although it's in pots and it can be taken in, it's worth taking steps now to ensure I have plenty of backup. The best way to do that is from cuttings. What I'm looking for are nice, straight, healthy stems without any flower buds. Now, if I took just the soft ends, that would root very readily, but it'd also die very fast. However, if I take some older growth, wood that's grown this year but has had a few months to harden off, it'll die off much slower and therefore have more time to produce roots. So that's what I'm looking for. So I'm going to cut back to there, and then I'll take another couple from this plant. Right, now the crucial thing, if you're taking any cutting at all, is have a polythene bag in your pocket and put them straight in, because essentially those are dying. And by sealing them in a polythene bag, we're delaying their death, which buys us time to prepare them so they can make roots. As it is, I'm going to do that right now. Right. This is just normal potting compost, and I've got some extra grit, which I'm going to add into it. You could take the cutting in pure grit if you had to, so don't stint on it. Wherever you have a heel, which is a slither that attaches to another stem, you tend to get much better rooting. So it's a good idea to keep that. Now where we have a long cutting like this without a heel, I'm going to cut that back. Do you see here that there are leaves coming from there and there? So if I just cut across there, sharp knife, and then take a few more leaves out. I always used to make my cuttings by just sticking them into the compost. But actually recently, I've been putting them between the pot and the compost, and they take much better. You just slide it down the edge of the pot like that. And the reason for that is because they're kept a bit warmer and the drainage is a bit sharper. Now, Mediterranean shrubs don't want to be too wet. Unlike some cuttings which need to be kept permanently wet, these are fine if you put them in a bright but not glaringly bright place. A sort of shade for half the day is fine, and mist them once, twice, 3 times a day if you remember. But if they turn brown at the tips, that means they are too wet, so to dry them off a bit. And then when you see fresh new growth, you'll know they've got a root system, and you can pot them up individually and then keep them over winter. They won't grow a lot between now and next spring. But once next spring comes, they'll grow away strongly and you'll have half a dozen healthy new plants. Now, we've had quite a few emails, letters and pictures about the problems of gardening on a slope. I've got one here from Carmen O'Dell, who says that I've got a very steeply sloping garden and I've recently removed a tree. She sent pictures of this. I'm a single mum. I've got lots of enthusiasm but not much time and money. And I'd like to grow some veg, but not only have I got slope and shade but awful soil, and I greatly welcome some advice. Another one, our garden has a north sloping exposed windy site with clay soil. This can all be a bit daunting, I do know that. But Carol has been to visit a very steep garden that is just packed full of ideas and inspiration.
This is the pretty Welsh village of Drefellyn, nestled deep in a landscape more suited to 4 legs than 2. But for some people, the desire to garden knows no bounds. Steve Harwood lives here with his young family, and over the last 7 years, he's transformed an almost vertical slice of Welsh hillside into a plant-rich and family-friendly garden. Most people would just take one look at this and head in the opposite direction. You turn around and you say, no, how can I possibly garden? What did you think when you got here?
We scrambled up the garden.
Right,
and
right up to the top.
Yeah, when I just saw the vista, just so excited, and we started bouncing up and down on the spot.
Right.
I just fell in love with the whole atmosphere of the place, the views, the river at the bottom of the hill. It's just such a peaceful place. And I didn't consider, really, the issues of a hill garden.
It looks wonderful now. It looks so inviting. You know, I just want to climb up in there. Can we have a look?
Thank you, yeah, of course we can.
actual landscaping must have been pretty hard work, wasn't it?
The hard landscaping was just real hard slog for the first sort of 3 years, really. It takes you time to get access. So as you're working your way up the garden, you're starting to form ideas in your head about what you're going to do in that area once you've got to it. I think if you try to take on a hill garden and think, I'm going to try and do it all at once, it would just be so overwhelming.
Yeah.
If you tackle it in small projects at a time, it just becomes so much easier.
Yeah. Well, you're certainly succeeding, aren't you? And everywhere you walk, you've got these new vistas, these little ways through, and it leads you on, doesn't it, right up the slope. Up we come. Once you'd got access and made your steps, you started to create these terraces. So how did you do it?
Well,
pickaxe? Yeah?
Pickaxe, shovel. I sort of like dug all the soil on this side and moved it across to this side to level it.
So that triangle there went over to the other side,
and created a level and you've got rid of all the soils at the same time.
You don't have to carry it down the slope or up it or anything, it's just to the other side.
Obviously all the stone that I dig out goes into building walls and rockeries, and you've got to reuse and recycle these days.
That's what you call local materials, isn't it? There are 7 terraces in all, no mean feat, and the clever thing about them is the way they've been planted. Each one has its own character. Even though this is a south-facing slope, by adding shrubs and smaller trees and vertical structures, Steve's created a range of growing conditions, from hot sunny spots, perfect for growing vegetables, to both damp and even dry shade. Everywhere you look, there's these secret little places, aren't there? This is so pretty.
Yeah, this is what I call my rose walk.
Not many people would have it on a level with a roof. What came first, the veranda?
Yeah, the veranda came first.
And I bet you can smell these roses from your veranda.
The scent of some of these roses is just amazing.
A really brilliant use of a bit of, difficult space.
Very, very
well
narrow.
done. Plenty of ideas, eh? At every stage, you've got a different view. You would never get that in a flat garden.
That's right, and on each area of the garden I've put seats so that you can actually enjoy that view. I'm trying to encourage this area to be a glade and plant lots of nectar-loving plants in this particular area and to get the butterflies in and the bees.
And you're succeeding too. Right at the top of the garden, Steve has made use of existing trees to create a shady woodland.
I've planted a couple of trees at the front edge just to enclose it a bit more. It's more protected now for the acers, which don't like to be in the strong winds.
But having a young family means this garden isn't just about plants. I'll tell you what though, they're not going to be able to play football up here, are they?
It's not a garden for football, it's not a garden for cricket, but it's a garden for using your imagination and making up games and hiding.
The way Steve's risen to the challenge is truly inspiring.
I've put the tree house in. You know, I know the kids, as they get older, they'll be able to go there with their friends and have sleepovers, and I've got a few more ideas I want to do up there.
I'm summer pruning these espalier pears, and it's a job that I do every year, anytime from midsummer to the middle of August. And it's very simple, but I know that some people feel very anxious about pruning. It comes with all kinds of problems of doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. And in fact, we've had a couple of emails, which I've got here, on exactly that subject. One is from Doreen Hamilton, and then another email from Beryl Wollaston, and so you've got a gift of 2 pear trees, 4 apple trees and a plum tree. My dilemma is they're coming up to their first summer pruning and I'm very unsure about what to do, especially as I don't wish to damage the trees. And it's a refrain I often hear that I don't want to cause harm to trees that are growing perfectly well, yet I do want to prune them. So the first thing to sort out is that apples and pears have a very different regime from plums and gages. The basic rule of plums and gages is don't prune unless you have to. However, for apples and pears, what we tend to do is prune in summer for training and restricting. Now, I've done this dozens of times so that I'm doing it with complete confidence. I know what I'm doing and I know that it's very easy. But if it's your first time and you're feeling a bit daunted, just take it steady, go slowly. Take a piece of new growth like that, and you can see it's new growth because you can bend it around. Follow it back down to old growth. And the old growth, that's 2 years old, and that's 1 year old, and that's this year. And then come back up the new growth and leave 2, 3, maybe even 4 leaves. Now, obviously the anxiety is cutting off a fruiting spur, especially if you're not quite sure what a fruiting spur should look like. Well, we've got some examples here. You can see there's one, the fruit coming off. If you follow this branch along, it's encrusted with lichen, good and old and probably riddled with canker. You've got a spur coming off it. That wood there is 2 or 3 years old. That's probably 3, that's 2, and there's fruit on the end of it. This here that I've pruned back is this year's, and if I leave that, that may well develop fruit next year or the year after. Now I'm going to poodle along and do this nice and slowly. But even if you don't have fruit trees at home, here are some jobs that you can get on with this weekend. If you have a variegated tree or shrub such as this holly, it's not at all uncommon to see strong all-green shoots at this time of year. This is because they're reverting to the basic green that the plant has been bred from. You should cut these off as soon as you see them, because they grow much stronger than the rest of the plant, and if you're not careful, you can lose your variegation altogether. It's time now to clear the first crop of beans and peas to make room for future plants. Lift them all, picking any pods that you want to use for cooking, and take the haulms to the compost heap. These espaliers are all riddled with canker, and that's not good. But it's never got desperate, and I think one of the reasons is that I prune them really hard every summer. That means that they're constantly exposed to light and air, and the fungus never gets a chance to develop. Anyway, I shan't take them out. They'll see me out. And it's the end of tonight's programme, but we'll be back next week for a 60-minute programme starting at 8 o'clock. So join me at Longmeadow then. Bye-bye.